If you've watched any of my appearances on Piers Morgan's show, you'll notice that virtually every time Piers spends his time discussing how the Democrats are obsessed with woke issues and trans rights. And what I've come to realize is that, in fact, the only time I'm put in situations where I discuss woke issues like trans rights is on Piers' show. And by the way, I see it all over the right, on Fox, on Daily Wire, Twitter, Rumble, basically the entire right-wing media ecosystem, and most notably in the ads that Donald Trump's campaign ran in this past election cycle. Meaning, it's not that Democrats are obsessed with this stuff, it's that Republicans are framing it as if Democrats are obsessed with this stuff so that they can then attack us on it. And that should be some helpful background ahead of this segment.
But a lot of it was also down to what is perceived to be just woke insanity, including this whole trans debate. And you've heard Bill Clinton was warning them about this. Joe Scarborough said afterwards it had been a disaster. You're seeing David Axelrod say they should never have fought on this hill. Lots of senior people now are coming out and saying this was a massive strategic error because you're trying to basically tell people the sky is blue when it's red.
Piers, the reality is that this wasn't an issue except for the fact that Republicans made it an issue. There was almost $250 million disinformation campaign surrounding the issue of gender reassignment surgeries among trans inmates. This is a position that Kamala Harris has been virtually silent on for over the last 5 years, but they took a cherry-picked a quote from 2019, shoehorned it into the narrative.
She said it.
Put a ton of money from a very well-funded right-wing media ecosystem behind it and convinced Americans that, again, an issue that Kamala Harris didn't say a word about in this election cycle is somehow the most important issue in this election cycle.
She had so much more money than Trump to spend. So much more money.
$1 billion.
But the idea that the right had all the money here.
It does not change the fact that what the right's money went to was a well-funded disinformation campaign trying to shoehorn this issue of trans rights into the zeitgeist.
You say disinformation. Are you denying she said what we all heard her say?
No, but I am denying that it's her position, or that this was her position in the 2024 election cycle. Some comment that she has walked away from 5 years ago, before she was vice president, does not create her position now. But nobody would know that. Nobody would know that. If I could just have one question.
Simple question for you.
Ben, if I could just have 1 second to finish my I know that you want to shoehorn it in, but you're going to have to be quiet until I finish my comments. If there wasn't such a well-funded effort, I could do the same thing, bro. I can just talk over you the whole time as well.
I'm asking you a genuine question about members of Congress. Name any Republicans that had trans flags in front of their offices, and then tell me how many Democrats had trans flags in the halls of Congress. You cannot tell me this wasn't an issue when there were congressmen and senators that if you walked the halls of Congress had trans flags up. They made it an issue. They made it an issue, man.
Do you just want to yell, or do you want to actually have a conversation? Because I know that you love the sound of your voice. But the fact that somebody
wants to yell.
Ben, my dude, I know you just want to yell. Like, it's great that you have your own show. You can do that into a camera with nobody interrupting you the whole time. The fact that somebody could acknowledge the humanity of trans people is not the same as the issue of gender reassignment surgeries for trans inmates. And if you ask the majority of Americans, because of this very well-funded right-wing disinformation campaign, where again, $250 million was put behind this thing, that is why the vast majority of Americans thought that she was better.
Okay, look.
Let me be perfectly clear. Democrats did not run on woke issues or trans rights, which is not to say that those issues weren't issues in this election, because they were, but they were because the right shoehorned those issues into the zeitgeist. For example, an ad depicting a trans athlete, who, by the way, is now 62 years old and a grandmother, played in Ohio, and that was funded by the Republican Senate Leadership Fund to the tune of $38 million. Trump's campaign poured around $20 million into this clip that I'm sure you saw because it literally aired during the World Series.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
In total, Republicans have spent $215 million, nearly $250 million, on ads painting trans people as a menace to society. But in reality, far from predicating Kamala's campaign on trans people like these commercials suggest, trans people were virtually non-existent in her campaign. Here's an article from a left-wing publication called The Nation, where they actually lamented Kamala's silence on the issue of trans rights. Quote, Kamala Harris does not, in fact, want to do transgender operations on illegal aliens in prisons, and that's too bad. The article goes on to say, with regard to this 2019 stance that she had that was the basis for her comments in Donald Trump's ad, Harris, meanwhile, seems to have walked back her 2019 stances, with her campaign telling Fox News that questionnaire is not what she is proposing or running on. This is perhaps unsurprising. As a senator, Harris aggressively backed anti-sex work legislation like Sesta Fosta, and in 2015, when she was California's Attorney General, her office pushed to deny incarcerated trans woman Michelle Norsworthy's plea for gender-affirming care while she was being held in a men's prison. Trump may click farm with hateful word salad, but the current Harris platform does not specifically mention transgender people at all. And as Democratic candidates have begun indulging in anti-trans rhetoric, Harris has stayed silent. In other words, the left actually admits in dismay that Kamala Harris didn't make the issue of trans rights a focus of her campaign. And yet the right has decided that not only was it an issue, but it was the top issue, the principal issue. The fact is that Republicans will decide what's most damaging. They'll pretend that that's what Kamala's or Democrats' position is, and then skewer the left for something that they've just created out of whole cloth. They're literally complaining about a caricature that they themselves created. But that right there is the benefit for Republicans of operating within a hermetically sealed media bubble. Because whereas anyone operating in good faith would simply say, no, Kamala is not running a campaign based on giving trans inmates gender reassignment surgeries, instead, they insulate themselves and they spread these lies over and over and over, and there's nobody to push back, and there's nobody to tell the truth. And not only do the lies persist then, but they are repeated so frequently, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, that they get seared into the cerebral cortexes of the people consuming this stuff. It becomes an absolute certainty to these people that Kamala is for gender reassignment surgeries in prison. It is literal brainwashing that we're seeing right now. All based on this position that she offered one time in 2019 that she has since refused to stand behind. But the facts don't matter to these purveyors of disinformation. All that matters is they can tarnish her reputation to an unwitting base, and they did. And so now, look, I don't like to speak in certainties, but I can damn near guarantee you that if you asked 100 random people to name Kamala Harris's housing policy, maybe, 2, 3, 4 people would be able to tell you? But if you ask those same 100 people what her position on trans inmates is, you'd get a hell of a lot more than 4. You'd get everybody who tuned into the World Series. You'd get everybody who watches right-wing media. You'd get everyone who is the target of a $250 million smear campaign against her. Now, you'll notice, too, that Piers said that Kamala had so much more money to spend, and so she could have rebutted these lies by the Trump campaign if they were actually lies. And that's true that she did have more money, but you can't spend money to make people unhear something that they have been beaten over their heads with every hour of every day for months and months and months inside of this right-wing media ecosystem. Saying that Kamala had more money than Trump ignores the fact that you can't outspend a political party that just outright lies. And again, this was not her position. And even if you do run ads, by the way, saying, no, Kamala Harris does not support gender reassignment surgeries for prison inmates, well then guess what? We're still playing on Republicans' turf. And then both sides are talking about gender reassignment surgeries, which clearly wouldn't help Kamala Harris. And let's be clear, Republicans know this. They know what they're doing. They understand that they have the ability to manipulate their audience because they do not care about lying. It doesn't bother them. They've predicated their existence as a party on doing it. Our job on the left is to reach out to enough people so that they know the facts before they do fall victim to right-wing disinformation. And that's a project that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money. It's something that I'm committed to doing. It's something that the Democratic Party ought to take seriously yesterday. There was also this moment from the Piers debate.
What about pardoning Hunter Biden? Not because I think he's innocent of the crimes, but because it would go a long way, perhaps, to showing the left that Trump is a different person, that he is prepared to forgive and move on. What do you think of that?
I think it's a terrible idea. I think you have to be held accountable for your actions. And I think the abuse of power by Hunter Biden, by Joe Biden's brother, and by the Biden crime family, and the money they were receiving from Ukraine and from Russia and from China is egregious.
I think Joe Biden, before he goes out of office, I think he should pardon Trump
Yeah, do the dirty work.
for the ridiculous Stormy Daniels case. I honestly do.
Wait, can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
Piers, can I ask a question here?
Yes.
Ben, do you think that Donald Trump should go through with his sentencing then because everybody should be held accountable for their crimes?
I don't know. I think the whole thing was a farce.
No.
I think the
It was
whole.
a
do you think that
the
Donald
whole
Trump
Stormy
It's not
Daniels
gonna hold
case?
up in the upper
I
courts.
think Joe
It was
Biden
crap.
should pardon him and end the whole thing now.
Do you think that Donald Trump should be allowed to be continued being prosecuted for in the Washington D.C. case or the classified documents case or the Georgia RICO prosecution, since everybody has to
No,
be held
because I
accountable
think
for their
it's
crimes?
very clear that it says you cannot go after a sitting president, and I think we all know
That's
his
not what
law
I asked
there. And
you.
every
That's
time
not
it's
what I
moved-
asked you.
I just
You said-
answered the
that's not what
question.
I
I
asked
just
you.
said no. The first thing came out of my mouth was the word no, and then I explained why. You need to
So
listen.
you said
I
everybody should
no.
be held accountable for their crimes, but not Trump.
The American people just held Donald Trump accountable, and they said they thought it was crap, and they reelected
That's
him.
not-
Pay
that's not how it
attention.
works. I'm asking
Pay
you.
attention.
I'm asking
Yes,
you.
it is.
You
It's
said-
exactly
you
how
said
it
that
works.
everybody
And
should be
that's
held
why-
accountable for
and
their
that
crimes.
is exactly
Do you
why they
believe-
have said we're going to wind it all down. That's
Okay,
exactly
let me.
why
All right,
Smith
listen.
has said, I'm
Dave
leaving.
Rubin.
That's Ted Cruz's podcast host, Ben Ferguson, saying that you have to be held accountable for your actions in response to the prospect of Trump pardoning Hunter Biden. So then I asked him, since he and Republicans have suddenly decided that law and order is once again their MO, whether Trump should also be held accountable for his actions. And what do you know? The answer is no. First, he says, because there's DOJ guidance preventing a sitting president from being indicted. And that's true, but it wasn't my question. My question was, should Trump be held accountable, not whether he will be. We know he won't. And then Ben decided that because there was an election, that the American people already decided whether Trump should be held accountable. But again, that wasn't my question. And it's also ridiculous. We don't determine legal accountability in this country based on the results of an election. We determine it in a courtroom. But of course, the reality is that Republicans will never call for accountability for Trump because they don't believe any Republican should be held accountable for anything. They've got nothing but tough talk if a Democrat so much as jaywalks. But Trump incites an insurrection, blocks the peaceful transfer of power, steals classified documents. They've got an excuse to explain away every single one. The difference between the two parties is that I can admit if Hunter Biden or any Democrat did something wrong, that they should be held accountable. But no Republican will admit the same for Donald Trump. So look, moving forward, there is a lot that we have to contend with. A right-wing media ecosystem that dwarfs what we have on the left, right-wing influencers and personalities and podcast hosts who can concoct a narrative to define the left regardless of its merits or the truth, complete shamelessness about doing it, and an audience that is so insulated on the right, they never know any better. So I know that all feels insurmountable, and it very well may be, but the onus is on us right now that we have diagnosed the problem, to work toward parity. I launched a Twitch account to try and reclaim some of this ground that we've lost. If you're on Twitch, please follow me there. Follow some other progressive commentators on Twitch, on YouTube, any of the social media platforms. We are in a marathon here, but the only way to get to the end of it is to start on mile 1. Before you go, just a quick note, if you'd like to see more of my content, which is always free of advertising, sponsorships, and paywalls, please make sure to subscribe to this channel using the subscribe button right here on the screen. And if you'd like to support my work even further, you can grab a copy of my instant #1 New York Times selling book, Shameless, available for sale right now. That link is also on the screen. Thanks so much for watching.